Your dignity doesn't depend on being unshakable. We live in a society that has transformed strength into a commodity, sold in self-help books, motivational posts, and corporate speeches. But the authentic strength that Dostoevsky glimpsed in his most brilliant moments doesn't fit these marketable molds. It is profoundly human. When we allow the world to recalibrate our definition of dignity to include not only our moments of triumph, but also our necessary pauses, something extraordinary happens. The space previously occupied by the anxiety of maintaining a facade transforms into energy available for real growth. As Dostoevsky intuited in Demons, the social masks we wear eventually exact their price, not in money, but in authenticity. The true inner revolution begins when we abandon the mistaken belief that asking for help is a form of failure. Dostoevsky, especially in his more mature phase, shows us that recognizing dependencies and limitations is not regression, but evolution of human consciousness. Being strong doesn't mean being perfect or unchangeable. The vision of strength is closer to the resilience of bamboo than to the steadfastness of oak, not resisting without moving, but bending without breaking, adapting without losing essence. The author's most memorable characters are precisely those who, having crossed abysses of suffering, emerge not stronger in the conventional sense, but more authentic, more conscious, more fully human. Contemporary society, with its glorification of productivism and constant functionality, has created a cult of the individual who never falters. Between the lines of crime and punishment, we can read how the pressure to be extraordinary can lead to morally catastrophic decisions. When strength becomes prison. Have you ever felt that? While everyone around you leans on you, there's no one to hold your hand when you stumble. The sky collapses on your shoulders like an unexpected storm. The alarm clock rings, but your eyes have been open for hours. You get up, make coffee, organize everyone's day, distribute smiles and energy you don't have, while inside your chest, a silent volcano accumulates pressure. There's no time to release this pressure. There's no space for your own fragility in the script the world has written for you. This is the paradox that Dostoevsky captured with surgical precision in his works. Those who carry light for others often walk in deep shadows. Society assigns silent labels. You are the strong one, you are the pillar, you are the one who never falls. And when we internalize this role, strength ceases to be a choice and transforms into shackles. The Dostoevskian gaze pierces the surface of human relationships and reveals the abyss between our public image and our inner turmoil. In his most complex characters, especially in Prince Mishkin of The Idiot, we see the purity of unconditional surrender confronted with absolute solitude. Dostoevsky already understood that excessive goodness can be a sophisticated form of self-annihilation. When everyone sees us as invulnerable, we build an invisible wall. Others don't cross it because they presume nothing inside needs repair. And thus begins the cycle. The more we help, the more we're expected to help. The less we ask, the less is offered. Strength, which should be our temporary refuge, becomes our permanent identity. Survival lessons in emotional chaos. Dostoevsky teaches us that a significant part of human suffering arises not only from adverse external circumstances, but from the silencing of our most essential needs. Like Ivan Karamazov, many of us develop an acute rationality that analyzes the world but often fails to protect our own spirit from exhaustion. The first lesson in emotional survival that we can extract from Dostoevsky's profound reflections is the fundamental distinction between strength and impermeability. In the author's view, true fortitude does not consist of being impenetrable to the pains of existence, but in remaining sensitive to them without completely disintegrating. Just as Raskolnikov, who needed to traverse the hell of his own conscience before finding redemption, we need to learn the subtle but crucial distinction. Avoid confusing being strong with enduring everything silently. The systematic silencing of one's own needs is not virtue. It is a slow process of self-denial that Dostoevsky identified as a prelude to profound crises. Instead, create moments of conscious silence to hear yourself. The noise of the contemporary world, so oppressive in its demand for our attention, drowns our inner voice. Recovering spaces of solitude is not selfishness, It is essential preservation. Dostoevsky often portrayed characters who only found clarity in moments of voluntary isolation, when the veil of social expectations was momentarily lifted. Your life also needs someone like you. Be that person. Dostoevskian altruism does not preach self-annihilation, but the delicate balance between giving to others and caring for oneself. In Notes from Underground, the author shows us the fate of those who live exclusively at extremes, whether of total surrender or complete isolation. The true practical wisdom emerging from the Dostoevskian universe suggests that strength is not measured by the absence of fissures, but by the ability to recognize them before they become insurmountable abysses. When Alyosha Karamazov allows himself to experience doubt and despair after the death of his spiritual mentor, he demonstrates not weakness, but the courage to face his humanity in its totality. In this tightrope, Walker's journey between being support and needing support, there are concrete tools that we could call Dostoevskian practices of emotional survival. The first is the audacity of honesty, not the brutal honesty that hurts, but the necessary truth that liberates. Recognizing your limits is not a confession of incompetence, but a demonstration of lucidity. The second essential instrument is the discernment of responsibilities. The Russian author, through the moral complexity of his characters, indirectly teaches us that assuming the weight of the world is neither possible nor desirable. There is a crucial difference between extending a hand and trying to hold the entire ocean. Reducing excessive emotional responsibility means recognizing where our action ends and that of others begins. The third tool, perhaps the most challenging for the perpetually strong, is the practice of strategic vulnerability. It's not about indiscriminately falling apart, but allowing selected people to glimpse your real struggles. We discover that sharing the weight doesn't increase it. It often makes it lighter.
The clear communication of boundaries emerges as the fourth indispensable practice. Dostoevsky's literary universe is full of tragedies born from uncommunicated expectations and unestablished limits. Learning to say, "I can't right now," without the appendices of guilt and excessive self-justification is a skill that preserves both your integrity and your relationships. Finally, the fifth Dostoevskian practice would be seeking support without calculating it as a moral debt.
In the author's profound view of the human condition, interdependence is not weakness, but a lucid recognition of the social nature of existence. When Razumikhin offers help to Raskolnikov, he is not creating a debt relationship, but expressing a fundamental truth about the human need for connection. Do you recognize yourself? Do you recognize yourself as that person everyone seeks in difficult times, but who rarely finds a shoulder to lean on? In this deep exploration, we examine the concept of the invisible weight, that feeling of carrying the world on your back while no one notices your own weariness. Inspired by the thought of Fyodor Dostoevsky, one of the greatest explorers of the human soul, we reveal how excessive strength can transform into emotional prison, and how to find balance without abandoning those you love or yourself. Discover how to transform the burden into wisdom and recover your emotional integrity without losing your generous essence. An invitation to authenticity for strong souls who occasionally need to remember they are also human. In the underground of consciousness, where Dostoevsky delved with such mastery, this discrepancy between who we are and what we project creates a fracture that silently expands. It's not about staging fragility or seeking pity. It's about the fundamental right to be human in all its complexity, to breathe between the acts of the play without keeping the mask backstage. And thus, paradoxically, we become prisoners of the very strength that everyone admires. We unfold into multiples to meet external expectations. But who meets ours? The man who becomes so essential to others that he becomes dispensable to himself. Our culture celebrates the resilient, the unshakable, those who remain standing amid the rubble. But Dostoevsky saw beyond. He realized that there is a silent form of self-destruction in carrying weights that should be distributed. The Russian thinker understood, as few did, that true strength is not in enduring silently, but in understanding one's own limits before they announce themselves through collapse. The nobility of personal sacrifice, so explored in Dostoevskian literature, reveals its dark side when it becomes an unconscious habit. Between the lines of crime and punishment, we perceive how Sonia Marmeladova gradually dissolves in the suffering of others, a precise reflection of so many contemporary souls who define themselves only by what they offer to others. The first step to break this prison is radical in its simplicity, recognizing that it exists. Admitting that, behind the fortress that everyone sees, there is a person who also bleeds, hesitates, and fears. Accepting that, as Dostoevskian thought suggested, the true human tragedy is not in falling, but in refusing to admit that we can fall. Between the tortured lines of the brothers Karamazov, an uncomfortable truth emerges. Silent martyrdom saves no one, only postpones the inevitable confrontation with our own humanity. Authentic strength is not in never weakening, but in weakening and still continuing, now with greater self-awareness. The prison of excessive strength is built brick by brick, day by day, in every yes when we needed to say no, in every smile that masked a contained tear, in every shoulder offered when our own legs barely supported our weight. And as Dostoevsky intuited, it is often the deepest souls who carry the heaviest burdens without ever mentioning them. Finding balance in an unbalanced world. These practices don't promise a life without storms. Dostoevsky would be the first to recognize the inevitability of human suffering. What they offer, however, is the possibility of navigating storms without the entire ship breaking apart. As the Russian author intuited throughout his work, true strength is not in impermeability to pain, but in the capacity to integrate it without being exclusively defined by it. The characters who find some form of peace are not those who avoided suffering, but those who traversed it while preserving their essential humanity. Similarly, our journey does not consist of avoiding burdens, but in carrying them in a way that doesn't crush our spirit, and this frequently means recognizing when it's time to share them or even set them down temporarily. Our dignity doesn't reside in never falling, but in how we rise again, and more importantly, in the honesty with which we acknowledge the fall. Dostoevsky's moral universe is populated by characters who find redemption not when they achieve perfection, but when they embrace their imperfections with courage and honesty. Raskolnikov begins his true path of redemption, not when he manages to justify his crime, but when he finally recognizes it in all its gravity. Our full humanity can only flourish when we accept that we were not made to carry everything alone. In turbulent family environments that populate the author's novels, we see the tragic fate of those who assume disproportionate responsibilities without ever sharing them. Protecting your emotional integrity is not an act of selfishness, but a sophisticated form of generosity, for only those who preserve themselves can genuinely give. Dostoevsky, who knew physical and psychological suffering firsthand, came to understand that self-care is not vanity, but existential necessity. In characters like Sofia Semyonovna, we see how the total sacrifice of self often leads not to redemption, but to the dissolution of identity itself. The strength that the world admires, that which never hesitates, never cries, never bends, is, under the Dostoevskian gaze, often an illusory strength, a social facade that covers unprocessed fragilities. True strength, as demonstrated by characters who find some form of peace at the end of narratives, is that which has integrated its shadows and recognized its limits. Being human means existing in paradox, being simultaneously strong and vulnerable, giving and receiving, teaching and learning. Dostoevsky's thought, especially in The Brothers Karamazov, his final masterpiece, encourages us to embrace this paradox instead of trying to resolve it. The tension between these polarities is not a problem to be eliminated, but the very essence of authentic human experience. The final invitation that emerges is for a more sustainable form of strength, one that is not ashamed of its necessary pauses, that does not diminish itself by seeking support, that recognizes its cyclical rather than linear nature. a strength that renews itself precisely because it knows when to retreat to recover. A strength that, paradoxically, finds its fullest expression not in invulnerability, but in the courage to recognize vulnerabilities. And thus, the cycle completes itself. You continue being support, but without abandoning yourself. You continue extending your hand, but without amputating your own needs. You remain strong, but with an expanded definition of strength that includes pause, recovery, and interdependence. Like Dostoevsky's best characters, you find integrity not in perfection, but in the honesty with which you face your own contradictions. And you, are you holding the weight of the world while silently crumbling inside? Which part of this reflection touched your soul the most? Share in the comments. Your experience might be exactly the light someone needs to find their own path. If this video spoke to your heart, like it, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. Here, your inner journey matters as much as your outer image.